Parak Beis, chapter 2, Mishnah Yud, Mishnah 10.
Is there sponsorship?
No, it was yesterday. So continuing with the same type of halacha from the previous Mishnah about situations where a person should not be marrying a woman because of the suspicion that can come about through it. We have another example. A sage who forbade a woman through a nether al baila regarding a vow she made about her husband. Meaning a woman goes ahead and she makes a vow. She says, I forbid myself to have any kind of benefit from my husband. Or however the exact way of doing it. She, through the power of a nether, through the power of a vow, she creates a prohibition on herself to benefit from her husband. Well, the Torah says, if the husband catches it on the day that she made the vow, or he annuls the vow on the day that he, let me just get your thing. Right. The husband, the day that he hears about the vow, that day he has to annul it. If he hears about it on the day that he hears about the vow, he's got to annul it. If he misses that day, he can't annul it anymore. So they're in trouble. She's forbidden to have benefit from him. How can they stay married? So the other option is to go for Hataras Nadarim. The other option is to go for annulment of the vow. But through the power of one Chacham, actually one sage, one great sage, has the power to annul a vow on his own. And if it's not one great sage, then even three regular people who are familiar with the laws of vows would be able to do that also. But in our case, this woman, she went to the Chacham, she went to a certain sage to get the annulment of the vow. The annulment of the vow is not magic. You have to find a basis for it. And in this woman's situation, there was no basis. He couldn't find a basis to annul the vow. So that means she came to the Chacham to annul the vow, and he rendered a decision, it can't be annulled. So he now basically forbade her on her husband, and there's no more option anymore than that they should divorce. So the Mishnah says, this Chacham, this sage, who forbade the woman on her husband through a nether because of the nether, the vow that she made, Hareze lo yisena, he shouldn't marry her. Because people are going to say that the reason that he didn't annul the vow was in order to marry her. So therefore, if he is the sage who did not annul the vow, he may not marry her. The Mishnah continues, Meyana oishacholza b'fanav. Here's a different situation. Let's say this sage, or a sage, was part of a beis din. It was part of a group of three people. And the situation was that this woman needed chalitza, as we've been learning about. She needed chalitza. And he was part of the beis din, part of the rabbinical court that administered the chalitza. Or it's a situation of mian. Mian, we learned a while ago. If you have a girl who's a minor, who is no more under the jurisdiction of her father to marry her off, but the Chacham and the sages say that she could still be married off either by, if there is no father, her mother, her brothers, or there are situations where the father loses his jurisdiction over her, and now when he marries her off, again, it's only a rabbinic, it's only a marriage with Rabbanan, it's only a rabbinic marriage. The Rabbanan, the sages enacted that if she decides at some point while she's still a minor that she doesn't want to stay married to this guy, she declares, I don't want to stay with him, and she's free to go. But that also has to be done in a beis din. So here the case is at the Chacham, who they have this Chacham, he's involved in the beis din who are administering this. Can that Chacham marry her? The answer is Yisana. He's allowed to marry her. From Neishu beis din. He's part of rabbinical court. If you're talking about an individual doing something, so people would say, okay, he did it in order for his personal benefit. But here it's not on his own. He's part of a group of danim. He's a part of a group of judges. In that situation, to be afraid that people are going to say, that somehow or another, what you did here with the other judges was in order to marry her, that we're not concerned about, and therefore, in that case, he may marry her. Now, the Mishnah continues. V'kulan. Now, regarding all the men that we said until now, let's just have a quick review. We had a number of situations of people that they do something regarding a woman, and because of that, they may not marry her. So we had cases before. We had cases of an agent who brought a get, right? He brought the get and he said, he was a sage who said, he was the agent who said that the get is kosher. Yeah, the witness who testified the husband is dead, right? Remember that one? He can't marry her. Now you have the sage who did not release the woman from her vow. Okay? These were the three examples we had. So the Mishnah says regarding them, an exception. V'chulan, all these people we just mentioned, shayu lehem nashim, that they have wives, meaning at the time that they did what they did, they were married. V'meisu, and then those wives died. Mutaris hinase lahen. Now they can go and marry those women. Meaning, what happened is that, let's talk about the sage, right? The sage who forbade her because through the vow. He was married, he had a wife. It's like he didn't have a wife, he had a wife. We say in that situation where a person is married, or if the agent was married, or if the witness was married, that means they have a wife, then there is no halacha that they can't go ahead and marry this woman. Meaning the wife then goes and dies, the wife that he had at that time dies, now he wants to marry this woman that he freed, or that he forbade. We don't say there that people are going to say, oh, originally the reason why he did what he did was because he was going to marry her after his wife died. No, we don't go that far. And even though according to halach, and even though according to Torah law, you're allowed to have more than one wife, in the times of the Mishna, that was still permitted. Nonetheless, it wasn't common. That's what they bring down here on the bottom. It wasn't a common thing to do. And therefore, again, if the man has a wife, to say that he did in order to marry her, people aren't going to say that then. So that's what it means. V'kulan shahayu lehem nashim. All these people we mentioned, if they have wives at the time, v'meiser, and then those wives died, mutaris linase lehem, then they can marry those women that they had affected. Now, another exception. V'chulan shenisu lacherim. All these women who, let's say again, were either the agent came and said about the divorce, or the witness said that her husband died, or the sage that forbade her through the vow. All these women, shenisu lacherim, they didn't get married to the sage after this happened. They didn't get married to the witness. They got married to somebody else. V'niskar shoshenas almu, and then they were divorced from their husbands or widowed. Mutaras einase lahen, then they could marry these people. Meaning these people who allowed them to marry their first husband, let's call it, their first husband, okay, that's not a problem then if that's why they're not married to the first one anymore, to marry them. Because as long as it's not a situation where they are marrying right away, then already it's not a situation where we say, oh, he did it for his own personal benefit. Because look, he did it and somebody else married her. So therefore, it's not a problem if, let's say now, after they get married because of these situations, and then they get divorced, to marry those people who had originally permitted them to their first husband. Now, the next Mishnah concludes, V'kulan mutares livneim oilachayim. All these women are mutter to their sons or their brothers. Meaning, in the case of, let's say, the agent, right? The agent went ahead and he brought the get, and he said, B'fanei nech, b'fanei nechtam. Okay, he cannot marry that woman. Can his brother? Can his son? The Mishnah says yes, because people aren't going to say, oh, you know why he went ahead and did this? It's really not true. But you know why he did it? He thought it was a good shidduch for his brother, or it's a good match for his son. People don't do those kinds of things if it's not for their direct personal benefit. And therefore, to go ahead and say that their brothers or their sons can marry these women, that is permissible. Now, I just want to tell you, I just want to read to you something here from the Bar Tanura about what he says here in the finality of all these cases. In all the cases that we said in this Mishnah, where it says lo yichnois, that he should not marry her, im kanas eino moitzi. If he does marry her, he doesn't have to divorce her. So if the chacham, if the witness, if the shliach, if the agent marry these women when they weren't supposed to, they don't have to divorce them. The only case where in our Mishnah we had that you have to go ahead if you married her, that you have to divorce her, it's chutz mahanitan al eshes ish. Remember the case where the person was suspect about cohabiting with a married woman? That's a situation where we say that he's not allowed to, he's suspect of doing that. You're not allowed to marry her. And if he does marry her, it's got to divorce her. Now, why is that? Shemitziua based in mitachas baila be'edim baraya brura afilam kinas yoitzi. The thing is like this. The wording of the Mishnah, I touched on this previously, and I'm not sure if I really gave it over correctly. Even though the word is nitan al eshes ish, which means suspect or leaning on, so to speak, and in the other cases we had there, like by the case of the non-Jewish woman or the maidservant, those situations were a suspect of it. And it could have, and the truth is, they could have been suspect. They could have actually been guilty of it. It wouldn't have made a difference. Here, the Mishnah, the Bartanura is clarifying. When we talk about the person who's suspect of committing adultery, and he cannot marry that woman. So it says the Bartanura, if the case is that they were witnesses, actual witnesses, she committed adultery, there's nothing to talk about. She's usher to her husband, and the halacha is the same way a woman who commits adultery is usher, forbidden to her husband, she's forbidden to an adulterer. That the Gemara in Saita learns from a pasuk. She's usher to her husband, she's usher to the adulterer. So therefore, if this nitan, if this person who is suspect, there actually were witnesses that he's more than suspect, he's actually guilty, there's nothing to talk about that if he marries her, he's going to divorce her, because the Torah forbids him from marrying her. But then he has another case. He has other cases. Let's say the witnesses don't have testimony about actual adultery, but it's called davar mechur. They have testimony about something that was very mechur, ugly, despicable. And for an example, this guy walks out of the house. This guy, this fella, this strange fellow walks out of the house. She's getting out of bed. Okay, he's walking out of the house. She's getting out of bed. Did they see adultery? No. But the circumstances are mechur, are quite ugly, quite suspicious, very suspicious. Now there are certain cases. In some cases, so he's not allowed to marry her. But actually, in some cases, if he marries her, he can stay married. In other cases, he can't. But for sure, in the case when the Mishnah says that the person was nitan aleishes ish, that he was suspect of that we call him nitan, which means suspect of it. But the point is that we actually have witnesses to the adultery. Then there's no then of course if he's not allowed to marry according to Torah law, and if he does, he's got to divorce her. And the marriage, and when he marries her, it's a marriage. Kedusha and Taibson, it is a marriage. She's not allowed to stay married though, not allowed to cohabit with each other. But the marriage, it counts as a marriage. He's got to give her a get. He's got to give her a divorce. But then you have other circumstances where we don't have exact testimony about it, about adultery, but we have circumstances that very, very, very strongly suggest to it. There, again, we say he cannot marry her, but under certain circumstances, if he does marry her, he can stay with her. In other ones, he can't. Okay. Now, back to Chofetz Chaim. So the Chofetz Chaim has said that now he's going to be talking about speaking lashon hara about a person, speaking derogatively about a person regarding their qualities. So he begins, Hein b'chachma, regarding wisdom. Kagoin, latziyah l'pnei anashim, you tell people, you tell other people, eich sheploini and chacham. You go over and you tell people, so-and-so, he's not so smart. He's not so sharp. He's not so he's not so smart, he's not so knowledgeable. Whichever way you say it. He lacks in wisdom. Okay? That would be an example, he says, of talking about a quality that, in many ways, there's not too many redeeming factors to why you're saying that. Of course, if it's a lie, or he's somewhat right, but he's exaggerating. Saying this about a person is clearly a great sin. And now it comes out he's even worse than a person who speaks lashon hara. He's what's called a maitzi shemra, spreading a false report. He's lying about the person. But even if, let's say, it is 100% true, he's not the sharpest tack, he's not the smartest guy. Nonetheless, all everybody, where the early Paiskim all established that it's lashon hara if it's true. And this thing, it was one example of saying that he's lacking qualities. This is clearly going to be considered lashon hara. And we're going to stop here and continue tomorrow how he brings down from the Rambam. If you want to be able to figure out what you're saying is lashon hara, you want to know, does this qualify as lashon hara? This is the We're going to read a Rambam tomorrow that lets us know how to measure it. But the point is that it's basically going to boil down to, if this person, right, would be very unhappy about what's said about him, that's lashon hara. So therefore, If you're going around and telling people this guy's not so wise, not so smart, okay, in that situation, you're putting him down for something that it clearly would be harmful to him. It would be a lashon hara. Now you may be wondering, well, what if the situation is you need him for a certain job, right? And so you want him to be a teacher. He wants to be a teacher, right? He wants to be a teacher. He's not knowledgeable. All right, we'll see about that. We'll see when we get there. But I think the Chofetz Chaim is dealing with, when you're dealing with qualities, we're talking about a person lacking a quality. In most of the situations, you're going to find that there's not going to be so much of a constructive purpose for it, and therefore, that there's not a constructive purpose for it, and therefore, in the majority of cases, it's going to be lashon hara, and as he said, people don't realize it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.